You're listening to don't tell me now, don't tell me no. Listen to This Means Podcast. Yup.
The Annie Nominated Storyboard Artist Michael Ruocco has stopped by, and someone online is selling their house with a complete Taz room. Would you buy it? So, of course, you realize this means podcast.
Are you ready, eager young space cadets?
Meep, meep. I saw a pussycat.
That is the limit.
Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
Hello, and welcome to, of course, you realize this means podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Graves, and with me is a wonderful, talented individual who has worked on so many projects that I know you know of, such as BoJack Horseman, New Looney Tunes, Cat Burglar, and Cuphead. Obviously, Looney Tunes cartoons if he's here. So please come with me and let's dive deep into the behind the scenes of storyboarding on Looney Tunes cartoons. Michael Ruocco, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to have you. Congratulations on the Annie nomination for Looney Tunes cartoons and your work on Hex Appeal.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah.
It's a wonderful short. I love watching it, and I'm going to be revisiting it every Halloween.
I'm glad. I love it when things sort of become perennials. That's like with the Christmas episode from, I think, the previous year. It's just it's nice hearing people reach out and say, "Hey, we watched the Christmas episode, this year." I'm like, "Oh, that's great."
That's so cool.
I'm glad that people are tuning in and watching it and stuff every year.
Absolutely. And you can check those out on HBO Max right now. I don't think they're going to be leaving the streaming service because they're bread and butter. They were made for that service.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm hoping too.
Exactly.
I'm watching everything from afar, wondering what's going to happen this week. What's going on?
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
But we are, while paying attention to that, also paying attention to the Annie Awards, which will be airing on, and it's the 50th anniversary of the Annie Awards. So the 50th one, what an honor to be having Looney Tunes a part of that.
Yeah.
But that will be February 25th. So we'll be rooting for you and Candy Milo.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have that Candy's sort of my fellow nominee from the show. I love Candy. She's so sweet.
That's amazing. Yeah, she's a friend of the podcast, and she was on talking about King Tweety last. So it's always an honor to have her to discuss Looney Tunes and Granny and Witch Hazel with her. She really loved the character, and she was rooting for it to become its own series or a spin-off series.
Witch Hazel's such a wonderful character, so I wouldn't be so.
She really is,
and especially if Candy's Witch Hazel, because even going in when I was doing that short, I knew that Candy was going to be Witch Hazel. And so when I worked on that board, I was just picturing her reads. I wasn't even picturing June Foray. I was picturing Candy because Candy sort of she can embody that character really, really well.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So I was happy to kind of channel the kind of like predetermined kind of how she would deliver lines and just sort of, and then once I heard the animatic with her in it, and I heard her do her witch's cackle and her like boil kind of like over the cauldron kind of stuff, I was like, perfect. It elevated to another level. It's like when you used to hearing stuff with no music, and then once you hear it with the music, you're like, oh, it's like a whole nother layer. It's a whole nother character's been added.
Yeah.
And Candy is embodied, like Candy carries that short.
She's fantastic. She's the only vocal performance outside of a Mel Blanc hiccup.
Yeah, that little sound, which is great. I'm glad they put that into.
Same. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. So sticking with Witch Hazel real quick, did you go back to the Bewitched Bunny and like the classic Chuck Jones shorts and really like break those down and get her style back, or was this kind
Yeah.
of reinvigorated
Yeah.
by everything else that was going on at the time?
It's kind of like, well, with everything on the show, the first thing we always did was look back at the old stuff. And, you know, there were some great Witch Hazels. The first one, which is a Bewitched Bunny, is the
I
first
believe
one with
so.
the Hansel and
Yes.
Gretel. That one's like almost like it's Witch Hazel, but it's even her design is still kind of, they're still figuring out. She works like a lot of it is she's in profile. So I didn't really look at that one in terms of like artistic direction for that one. But Broomstick Bunny, which is the second one, where you see all those wonderful like almost flat backgrounds where like there would be the table would be painted onto the wall, but the vase would be floating and all that stuff with her at the cauldron with her cat and Bugs with the. It's funny. I watching that cartoon. Whenever I start a cartoon, if we're basing it on something in particular, a specific character, I'll go back and look at the cartoons. And I forgot how bony and thin Bugs' legs are when he's in that costume. When he's dressed up in the witch costume, he's got like these thin, like bony legs, and it's like it's weird, but I kind of love it. And
it really juxtaposes the mask shape. You know, I think that was the joke there for sure.
And I did myself up tonight. You know, like it's I love that cartoon. Everything about that cartoon, I adore that one.
Same. So before we get more into Looney Tunes, because I have a lot to talk to you about, first we've got to talk about some news. And
oh yeah, I love this.
That comes our way from a wonderful article in The Independent where a house full of Looney Tune toys is on sale in the UK. Now, if you are in the UK and you want to, I guess, put in a bid, track down this Independent article and find the listing on rightmove.com. It is going for £79,000, which translates to around $96,000 in the US. And I don't know, like I think having a full room full of Taz plush is a bigger selling point than having an empty room. So what was your take on this?
It's definitely it's what I guess you would call it in real estate. You would call it a conversation piece. You would call it something where it's like, well, here's our Taz room. And the funny thing is looking at the picture, first of all, like looking at it in terms of like the dimensions of the room, just trying to look at it. It looks like it's supposed to be like a second bedroom on the listing.
Yeah.
It's a very small room. It seems very small, or maybe just some of the Taz plushes are really big. But the other thing I kind of noticed when I was looking at this picture of all these Tazes was that I can't tell if it's a lot of the you realize that in terms of like Taz's design in regards to a plush, there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of room for like Taz is always going to be that specific shape, that mouth open with the teeth. And I can't tell if it's a lot of the same plush or if there's like different ones. Like some of them are probably like nice ones you'd find at a toy store, and some were probably like at a carnival or found in like a crane game, and they're like cheapo, like sawdust filled toys. I can't really tell. The picture isn't great quality.
Right.
But just the fact that almost all the Tazes have like the same mouth open, you know, fuzzy eyebrow, teeth exposed. And then I love how there's just like one lone Bugs just laying on the floor in the back.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
And I for a second I thought that the weight from all the Tazes was breaking that like standing shelf in the back, but it's just the design of the shelf. I thought it was just warped from the weight of holding so many Tazes on it.
I mean, it is a image that will definitely stick with you. And yeah, I don't think they weigh very, very much, but it definitely does give that like warped standee kind of feel. Cause
it looks like it's going to topple over.
It does. But I think, I definitely think that's the design of that shelf, which does the house also come with that shelf? I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, you assume if the house, because normally if you buy a house, everything's gonna be cleared out by the end. But if the selling point of the house does it come with? Did it say in the article? I forgot to check closely. Does it say it comes with them?
It doesn't say. It says that it has a washer and dryer, 2 bedrooms, 3 fish tanks.
Talk about a spin cycle.
Yeah.
It's like the only thing that spins in that apartment.
And a large sculpture of a spider.
I saw that hanging on the wall, and it's like, what is that? I mean, like, and here's the thing: is that like, yeah, normally you'd get the apartment and they would clear everything out. I couldn't tell if this is just like, listen, I just didn't have the time to clear up like all 87 of these Taz plushes. So just picture a bed and like a dresser and like a nightstand in here. Ignore everything, all the brown and light brown and teeth. Just ignore that. Just pretend that's not there.
Ignore the teeth. You just got to look past it.
Yeah, it's like a clue into like also kind of like, I mean, I've met people who have not obsessive collections, but they have prominent collections of things, and so like this doesn't really surprise me. It's not like a daunting thing, but it's like, I guess, I mean, the thing is too is that there was a lot of Taz. Taz was really big in the 90s, and since then they've made tons. I remember commercials for Taz, like the toy that you pull on a thing and he would vibrate and spin.
Yeah.
And like there was a lot of Taz merch. So,
and he had his own show.
Yeah, and so like they went to town. So this person clearly
a true collector.
True collector. And at least it looks like it's just limited to plushes too. So thank goodness there isn't like, because I'm sure there's tons of T-shirts and the head mugs, and all that stuff.
And speaking of Taz collecting, I wanted to go ahead and announce the winner. I did a giveaway thanks to Funko Official and Warner Brothers. They teamed up and partnered with This Means Podcast to do a giveaway. And as Warner Brothers is celebrating 100 years of storytelling, who better to be center stage than the ultimate superfans, the Looney Tunes? That's how Warner Brothers is positioning the Looney Tunes in this celebration. And so what they're doing is they're putting the Looney Tunes in these different costumes and pairings. And this one, the first one that came out, literally I went to Hot Topic and I saw it on the shelves on January 1st. So this was like a must-have for me, but seeing it on the shelves immediately gave me a lot of good vibes for this year going forward in this celebration. And just seeing Taz mixed with Scooby-Doo for this, I thought that was really creative. And, they're both eaters. They're both, they communicate without using real words. You can kind of make out what they're saying if you listen closely. But yeah, I just thought this was a really cool, well-designed Funko figure. And you can check out the entire line over at Funko.com and see Daffy as Shaggy, Tweety is Velma. I mean, they got the whole thing. And then they have a even bigger one where it's Bugs driving the Mystery Inc. van. That's super cool. And Bugs is obviously Fred, the leader of the gang. So I just think this is really cool and really special. And so I was doing a giveaway on the social medias. That's This Means Podcast over on Instagram and on Twitter. And the winner is Tiffany V. Ramos. She was the one that answered the question correctly. What year was Taz introduced into the Looney Tunes? The answer was 1954. And she put that down and she tagged 3 people and she won. So congratulations, Tiffany. And I will be reaching out to you to get you that Funko figure. Michael, have you seen those, by the way?
I saw the Velma one and I saw the Taz one because you posted that one. And I've seen, because Bowser shares like 87 things a day on his Instagram. So I saw a promo image of the Looney Tunes gang in the Mystery Machine, like some new art that was drawn. And so,
really cool art. And I love the mashups. And Eric Bauza, also a friend of the podcast, it should be coming back this year. But also, he was telling me that they might be doing some special, like more special things with that. I don't want to tease the pool too much, but I'm really excited.
He always has the inside dope when it comes to we would always find out stuff first. It's like, how did you find out, Bowser? Bowser posted it, or Bowser shared it on his Instagram. Oh, like he puts out stuff before the press releases do. He's so on top of that stuff. He's great.
He is great. But back to you, sir. We're gonna dive deep into your career. So one of the big tentpole animated projects that you worked on, I would say tentpole in a broader sense, as a you know an animated show that got a lot of acclaim early on. That was in 2014 when you worked on BoJack Horseman.
Yeah.
What was that process like?
BoJack, that was my first project when I moved out to LA. I used to live in New York, and then
Okay.
I moved out to LA, and I literally just put my bags down. I moved in with some friends in an apartment in Burbank, and I get a message from Mike Hollingsworth, who I met the previous year at an animation. It was Animation Block Party, which was like an animation event, screenings and stuff in New York and Brooklyn. And he
Nice.
remembered me, and we were friends on Facebook. And at one point, he just reached out because he was following me on Facebook and stuff. And he goes, "Hey, Mike, I'm working on this pilot. It's about a depressed horse. I think you'd be perfect for it. Do you want to help out on it?" I said, "Yo, yeah." And in my mind, I'm like, I need the job.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Can you storyboard?" And I was like, "Can I storyboard?" And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, "Can I storyboard?" Because I never boarded. I kind of boarded a little bit on my thesis film in college, but I never did it professionally. I just animated. So I'm like, "Oh yeah, I could do it." I just faked it. I just said, "Oh, I could board. Yeah, sure. What are you boarding in? Flash? Oh, yeah, Flash. I could do that." And so I was boarding with a few other people on the pilot. So we came in on the pilot, and then I animated a bunch on the pilot, and then we were waiting. I worked on another show at Shadow Machine while it was getting like shopped around, and Netflix picked it up, and it was the first original animated show for streaming, and we didn't realize how much it would set the stage for everything coming after it. And it's a great show. The writing was fantastic. It's funny, I actually just last year, because I never finished the series, I don't have a lot of time. I don't really watch a lot of the stuff I work on. So I finally got around, because that show is, for people who don't know, BoJack is sometimes it gets very dark and it gets very sad, and you have to be in nothing makes you feel out of place in LA like watching a character having depression in LA. So like it was like I'd had to be in a really specific mood to watch it. But I finally finished the series last year. I finally watched the end of the series, because I worked on the first season. I worked on the pilot in the first season, and then I left to go work on new Looney Tunes after that. But I didn't work. But I watched up to like season 3, and I did the last couple seasons, and I finally caught up with it. But it was a great show. It was a great kind of like trial by fire, learning the process and proving myself, and kind of getting a leg up in terms of the world of boarding. And then I kind of fell in love with boarding because of that, because I'm like, oh, it's like animating, but I don't have to in between and everything. And it was kind of fun. So that was BoJack.
Awesome. So yeah, you brought up your first introduction into the greater Looneyverse, as we're calling it. And so what was it like working on Wabbit, initially called Wabbit and then changed into New Looney Tunes, before Looney Tunes cartoons and the retro vibes came up? This was a more abstract look at look at the Warner Brothers characters in the forest, with other foresty creatures that weren't exactly Elmer Fudd and Porky Pig, but they came in later.
Right.
Like this was a major difference from everything that we knew as Looney Tunes existed up until that point. So did you have a big say, or how things like turned out in that respect?
Well, we all were involved, and there was the show was sort of like almost like a weird, I don't know. I mean, I can't say that it directly affected it, but it was one of those Wabbit and New Looney Tunes walks so Looney Tunes cartoons could run. Or like it's one of those kind of feelings where, because before that was the Looney Tunes show, which was sort of the sitcom show, and I worked. Jessica Barutsky was the designer on that Looney Tunes show, and she was initially the designer on Wabbit. So it was great working with Jess early on, and they were going with more of originally kind of Jess's design sets came in, and then it kind of got honed into more of a graphic sensibility with sort of almost rubber hose limbs in a way, and it was slapstick. It was aiming more towards 5.5-minute slapstick, kind of going closer to the roots of the character, but with some modern twists. And the crew, I mean, throughout the whole series, first season all the way to the third season, we would go in and laugh every day. It made me fall in love with pitching because we'd actively, pitch the cartoons. And
Yeah.
on
Oh,
that
wow.
show, what we do is we would go in every day, and we would, or every, twice a week, usually a Monday and a Wednesday, and we'd go in, and they'd be like, okay, we're doing an episode with Bugs, and he had a little squirrel character named Squeaks, and they're facing, this knight character, and and it's with a dragon, and so they could be like, okay, and then we'd sit in the room, we'd get donuts and coffee or Danishes or whatever, and we'd sit there from like first thing in the morning. We'd get there at like 9 a.m. and we'd sit there with Post-its, and we would have like a rough outline, but would each take like what we call like a beat or a bullet point of the episode, because there were 5.5-minute episodes each. And we'd sit there with Post-its and just board out the show and put it all up on the wall, kind of the old fashioned way.
Oh, that's
And
great.
he later became like our full producer, but he was our story editor at the time. Was a fella named, he's great, Matt Craig. He was sort of our grand poobah, and he wanted to kind of be like, you got to do it like the old guys did it. So let's have a whole bunch of push pins and stick them in the wall, and he'd write all the dialogue. And from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, would be putting stuff together, and then we'd all go into the room, and Matt would live pitch he'd have the pointer stick and be like, so Bugs comes out of his hole and he goes, what's going on? And this character goes, I want, and he would go through the whole, the whole cartoon with all the sound effects. He would do all the Foley with his mouth, and it was
I
so
love this.
fun. And it was inspiring. So that's my favorite thing when I board is pitching, because I learned from Matt, and we had a really great team. And we'd go in, and the camaraderie on that show was so wonderful. We'd laugh every day. There were some things, like, compared to Looney Tunes cartoons, there were some provisos and limitations. Like, the show was Y7, so there was a lot of stuff that we couldn't do.
Right.
We couldn't have, like, a character go, that guy's screwy. We couldn't, there was certain word verbiage or wordage or certain things we couldn't do. A lot of the violence had to be toned down because it was for kids. It was aimed specifically at Y7.
Mm-hmm.
And but because of those limitations, we had to find creative ways to work around those limitations. So
I think it just made the show better.
Right. So, like, for example, like we do an episode with Yosemite Sam, say, driving a car, and he's chasing Bugs down in this car, this truck, and we get a note saying, oh, he needs a seatbelt. And it's like, well, how are we gonna do it? Oh, because he was supposed to get crashed and get flung out the windshield and get hurt or something. And it's like, oh, you can't do that. It's like, well, I know. He gets in the thing, and then instead of one seatbelt, Bug straps him in with like 17 seatbelts, and now he can't drive the car, and he crashes into a tree, and it blows up. And they're like, "That's fine. It's not imitatable behavior. As long as he's wearing a seatbelt, it's fine." So it's like, okay. So we find creative ways to deal with like certain standards and practices notes, or like, and we try to pair characters together. And it was the first time we also did Crazy Daffy. I did at the end of the first season. We did all the Bugs. Because it was a Bug-centric show. And then at the end, we didn't know if we were going to get another season or not. So Matt and the guys were like, if we are going to, because we snuck in, we started bringing other characters like Elmer, right, and other characters were kind of slowly trickling in. But he's like, if we're going to do, we got to do one with Daffy, because we already had Porky in there, and we had a kind of a interesting kind of planes, trains, and automobiles kind of dynamic between Porky and Bugs, like Porky being the John Candy character, and Bugs being the Steve Martin kind of character. Kind of, sure. Porky's patient and Bugs isn't, because he's like stuttering, like, finish up, and then he would, Bugs would always a lot of times be the loser on that show. Yeah. And at the end, they were like, well, we got to do at least one Daffy, and they said, Mike, do you want to do the last one, Daffy, Porky Daffy? And I said, can it be Crazy Daffy? Can we go back to the woohooing Crazy Daffy? And they said, if you could write it, sure. Yeah. So we wrote an episode, and it was called, I think it was like Porky's Duck Livery Service or something like that. And it was, Porky has to deliver a duck to a pond, and it happens to be Daffy. And it was D. Bradley Baker as Daffy, because he was Daffy in Space Jam.
He was.
And him and Bob. And then Sam Register saw it, and he really loved that last cartoon. So when we did the next season, they were like, let's do more Porky Daffys. And hearing Bob and Dee go back and forth and as Porky and Daffy, and doing a lot of more zanier Crazy Daffy, that was fun. That was really a blast.
Cool. I'm going to go back and look that up. I want to revisit that now that you've given some backstory to it. But I love that approach of taking the classic, pen and notepad to the wall and having it play out in front of everybody, and you go through and you go through the beats.
Yeah.
I love that aspect of the animation process, but the storytelling process behind
Right.
these shows.
And we'd all be in the room together, so we'd bounce ideas off. What if, what if Bugs did this? Oh, and then that could escalate and lead to this. And we would literally
Yeah.
bounce off. And then also we kind of figured out, because we had to work on these tiny little Post-it notes, these little things, we learned how to kind of like do the broad strokes. We would almost pre-board the cartoon, and we'd have to work with kind of figure out a shorthand for the characters and the backgrounds and everything. So it made us not get too focused too heavily on the individual drawings when we're boarding. Just get the broad strokes down, get the action down, do some fun posing, get them down, and that was a blast. It was hard, but it was a blast.
Amazing. So slight tangent from the animating of the Warner Brothers lexicon to a little bit more broader sense, because you have a writing credit on New Looney Tunes,
Yeah.
as well as the Tom and Jerry shorts.
Yeah.
And I loved those, by the way, and I wish we got more of those from that talented pool of artists that were working on Looney Tunes cartoons 2 years ago. But can you talk a bit about working on Tom and Jerry?
That was fantastic. We were told, because it was right smack in the middle of our production. Pete came in and says, "Hey, it's Tom and Jerry's 80th birthday, next year," and we were asked if we want to do some Tom and Jerry. So, and we were like, yeah. So we all sat in a room and we pitched ideas. And one of the things that was mentioned is that we'll do a few Tom and Jerry's, but the only stipulation was that one of them had to take place in Japan, because Japan loves Tom and Jerry. I was actually in Japan in 2019, right before COVID. But I went to Annecy, to promote the Looney Tunes. And then like right before that, though, I was in Japan, and Tom and Jerry was everywhere. They love Japan. They love Tom and Jerry in Japan.
Wow.
So great. It's like, and then during these brainstorming sessions, we all work together, and someone says, well, what about it's Japan sushi restaurant? And that was one. And my buddy, Andrew Dickman, boarded that cartoon and wrote it, and it was absolutely fantastic. And then I sort of, one of us, or I don't remember who, but mentioned, well, what's something that Tom and Jerry hasn't done? Because there's been so many incarnations of Tom and Jerry. And I said, what about a cat tree? That's something that most people who have cats, they have cat trees. And what if Tom built a really extravagant one and Jerry kind of gets into the mix? And so that was mine. And I co-boarded that one with another one of our Looney Tunes co-boarders, storyboard artist, Ryan Katam. So I took the first third and the last third, and he took the middle. And we boarded in the classic style of Tom and Jerry. We were aiming for between 1942 and 1946, kind of in that sweet spot of peak Tom and Jerry.
Yeah. I would say you nailed it. I mean, those are some fantastic cartoons, and I love revisiting them, but I wish there were more. We only have 2.
Me too. I mean, we had such a blast. We had such an absolute blast making those. And, and then also it was great seeing them cut together and them actually putting the old Bill Hanna screams in there. Yes. And some of the old sound effects. And
I mean, the slapstick just leaps off as modern, but it's a modern throwback,
right.
It's fresh, but also it's familiar. That's what works about it.
Yeah. So and the thing is, even when we were making it, we were like, which Tom and Jerry are we using? Because I remember Alex was even like, let's go full, Puss Gets the Boot Tom and Jerry, when it's Jasper and Jinx Tom and Jerry, where they're constantly fuzzy. You could see every stray hair, scraggly hair on Tom. And then it's I boarded it sort of in that sweet spot of 45, 46, where they,
You did.
And then
It's a mix.
when it went to design, because we had Jim Soper and Dan Haskett and others designing, kind of taking our board drawings, they kind of found it's just right after that Jasper Jinx era. So it's around 41, 42. So it's still they're doing their classic gags, but Jerry is a little bit more, he's a little more like a mouse. He looks kind of like his earlier mouseier kind of look, that he doesn't look like cute giant baby head Jerry yet. And that was but it was fun because those characters are actually really deceivingly hard to draw. As much as like the Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry kind of coexisted in the same kind of golden age period. And there were some animators some animators who worked on Tom and Jerry who worked on Looney Tunes or vice versa. They're very different cartoons. The timing is much more specific in Tom and Jerry's. The style of humor is a little bit different. And but having the experience with the Looney Tunes shorts, we knew that we just had to keep, because the whole goal with the Looney Tunes shorts too was just to keep the spirit of those characters alive and how you know them.
Which I think the team did a fantastic job with.
Thank you. And everybody worked so hard on all the shorts, including the Tom and Jerry's. So like, it was great just being able to be like, okay, what would Tom do? What would he not do? What would Jerry do or not do? And just sort of channeling that classic energy. I even put a couple little nods to some of the animators when I boarded it. I think the crate that Tom is unpacking all this stuff, and I put Spence's, so Irv Spence, the animator who did some of the great takes, some of the best early Tom and Jerry takes where his eyes are really bugging out and some really graphic expressions and stuff. He was fantastic. And,
I love that.
Even certain things, there's certain ways they would draw characters running off screen or zipping here and there, and which is very tonally, not even tonally, but just stylistically different than the Looney Tunes. So it was like having to learn like almost like a detour from Looney Tunes. It was a slightly different school of drawing and thought about how those cartoons are made versus the Looney Tunes. So it was a good little, almost not a break because we're still working very hard, but it was definitely a fun little side quest in classic golden age cartoondom before we got back full force up back on the Looney Tunes again.
Not only was the coloring different, the framing was different because you had human characters that you didn't get to see all of. Like you only saw like their kneecaps.
Oh yeah.
And then down. So like the framing for Tom and Jerry was drastically different than anything going on in Looney Tunes as well. The gags happen around the sushi and everything going on with like the mechanisms that make those shorts so fun to watch. I thought you did a really good job of bringing that back.
Yeah, and that's all on. Thank you, and that's all on. For that first cartoon, that sushi one, that was all Andrew. I mean, the design team as well, but Andrew, boarding on these shows, we're creating essentially skeletons, and for what the cartoons are going to be. And Andrew came up with a lot of those gags and boarded the whole thing, and then of course it gets fanned out, and then everybody touches it. The design team, the animators. We had some in-house animators too, like. Folks like Bill Waldman, who is absolutely brilliant. He did some of the best stuff on the show, and those Tom and Jerry, specifically the sushi one. He did some really great stuff with those characters, like Tom getting his foot stomped on by the sushi chef, and Jerry sneaking, and Tom pretending to be the little lucky cat with the waving paw. That's all. Right, that's all Bill. And like we'd actually walk by his desk, and he would actually be animating on paper. And he would be flipping drawings. And I remember one day I was just watching him, and he was just drawing Tom's whiskers, because they kind of, in the old cartoons, they would almost cross. They wouldn't like flare out like Bugs's do. They would almost like curl into each other and almost make like, not like a mustache, but there's some times where Tom has like this weird intertwined whisker thing, and he was just going through and drawing in these really beautiful, precise whiskers on Tom and making sure that they flowed when he jumped up in the air and staggered when he screamed and stuff. And it's like watching magic happen, especially because like people Absolutely. And on the shorts we had a lot of classic these guys who worked for Bluth, or they worked on the early Disney stuff, like Chris Wall.
Wow.
Chris Wall was the lead on LeFou, who was like the lackey to Gaston and Beauty and the Beast, and he was animating for us on the series. And we had Skip Jones, who he did some of the best stuff on the Bluth films. Like he animated a good chunk of the Dom DeLuise cat Tiger in American Tail. And so like you would go by their desk and we'd talk, and we'd ask them old stories of what was it like working on this movie, and you would get to see them bring their skills, their years of experience and skills back into bringing these characters back from Tom and Jerry and the Looney Tunes and so on. And it was brilliant. it was just brilliant to be able to go in every day, and everybody on the show was so talented. So like you go into the background department, you know, we had Aaron Spurgeon was our art director, and you would see these like, oh, for this cartoon we're gonna make the backgrounds more in the vein of like the Freeling, you know, the Freeling cartoons, like Paul Julian. And then like you would see like, oh, you know, this cartoon's taking place at night, so the color schemes of the characters are going to be different from short to short. So like, you know, some coyotes that, you know, they take place earlier in the day or later in the day, so Coyote and Roadrunner are going to be colored based on the time of the day. And they would think about all that stuff. So when you'd see from the writing to the boards, all the way through from design, animation, backgrounds, everything, it was just like so many talented hands coming together and making something really spectacular. Like we would see stuff come back, and we go on the server. I was like a little pack rat. Every morning I'd look for inspiration on the servers, and I would see like, oh, Jim Soper did designs for this cartoon, and whoa, those are great. Or, oh man, look at these layouts for so-and-so's cartoon. Or, oh man, we have some animation coming back from so-and-so. Let's see the pencil tests. And we would get so fueled just by seeing really amazing stuff by all the people on our show that we just, I would be fueled just to go back to my desk and be like, I'm going to work my butt off just to make sure that keep the standard of quality up, because everybody's working so hard. So
see, listeners, traditional animation is not dead. It is just behind the scenes of these wonderful shorts that we're continuing to get, because we even have more Looney Tunes cartoons coming our way. They just haven't been released yet.
yeah,
But as soon as they are, you bet we're going to be watching them and then talking about them. But going back to your filmography, you have worked on Cat Burglar and Cuphead most recently, and those also have retro throwback feels. Cat Burglar with Tex Avery, and Cuphead with just, you know, this retro design based on a game that was inspired by 1920s animation. So like these influences that you're pulling from, they have grounds and bearings in the projects that you are getting to work on. How great is that? Like
it's wonderful, because I grew up with, you know, all that stuff, watching them on TV or having them on tape. So like I'm a little typecast these days because everyone knows me as the cartoony guy, because I work strictly on, it sounds like I work strictly on golden age looking stuff. But it's fun because I really genuinely care about learning where we came from, and going back to look at where we came from. And we've come a long way, and seeing like, you know, Tex Avery versus something like Cuphead are two very different styles. You know, they come from a different, you know, a similar period, you know, only a few years off, a decade off from each other, but they're so stylistically different, even down to the timing of the cartoons are very different. So like I love going back and doing research and studying the history and being like, where did this come from? And the fact that the folks at Studio MDH, when we worked on the show, you know, there was communication with Studio MDHR, who made the game, and we got to see them working on the game while we were the DLC for the game while we were making the show. And
I didn't know it went that far back.
It's incredible. I mean, it took a while because like you look at the animation of the DLC and it's like every frame is hand drawn and then hand inked and then scanned and colored, and then the backgrounds are watercolor backgrounds and everything. And you know, we had to make, you know, I don't know how many shorts or episodes for Cuphead, but in the same amount of time, you know, the pipeline is very different from how they made the game. But they set a really high bar, and we had again, like Looney Tunes, we had a very amazingly skilled, talented group of people. Andrea Fernandez, who did the art direction on Cuphead, you know, they really nailed that. Like if you look at the old, you know, color classic Fleischer cartoons, really capturing that essence of the watercolor. And the folks at Lighthouse, the animation studio, they did a fantastic job, and everybody just really locked into that style and knew like the kind of gags that they would have done in like 1935, and channeling a little bit of that, but also bringing them up to, you know, modern sensibilities in terms of comedy and timing and things like that. So there's a little bit of it's never going to look exactly, you know, like you know, with the time and the budget and the the schedule that that a production normally has, but we did something really, really genuinely fantastic, and we really wanted to harken back and pay homage to these cartoons that we loved and grew up with.
It
And
feels respectful. It feels like an homage that is worth revisiting. And I hope that people that watched it actually went back and watched those old Fleischer cartoons and, those really classic Mickey, like Walt Disney shorts that came out in that era.
yeah,
And even Oswald cartoons. Like I know he's getting a little bit of a resurgence because he had a new short come on YouTube and celebrating the Year of the Rabbit over there as well. It's just really great to see these classics get their shine, get their
yeah.
time in the
And
day,
also that there's folks, there's a, if you look at the folks, there's a restoration team now
Yeah.
with the Fleischers, and you're seeing these beautiful restorations of actually taking the negatives and scanning them and up in HD, and you get to see these beautiful prints. Because I'm used to seeing washed out old, public domain VHS tape prints of these cartoons. So to see them in these vibrant, beautiful colors, and man, it would be so handy when we were on Cuphead. But we did an amazing. Everybody did such an amazing job, and I'm glad that both between that sort of the what's old is new is sort of in vogue again, between like the Mickey shorts and Cuphead and the Looney Tunes shorts. That like it's fun to be able to go back and revisit where we came from and kind of harken back to that golden age stuff. It's really a blast. It's like the timing for me was perfect because I love that stuff. So to me, to work on a bunch of these different projects has been just an absolute blast to kind of channel that energy that I loved.
Yeah. I can't imagine the level of like honor it is to get to like sit down and being asked to draw these characters. Like, is there a specific character that you got to draw while working on any of these shows that you loved drawing and you were like, oh, I just, I want to make this character have his own his own show if one day or revisit him in a day in the future and just get reinvigorated by the work that came before, but also making him modern. Was there a character like that?
There was a few. I mean, like for me, I remember being a little kid and watching Roadrunner and Coyote with my grandfather, and I'm happy to say that my grandfather is still alive, and I was able to show him. It's like, remember all those years ago when we used to watch Roadrunner and Coyote, and I got to show him my Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons, and he laughed. I mean, he's hard of hearing and hard of sight now, but he got to be able to see it and laugh, and he liked it a lot, and so that felt great. So it was great being able to kind of capture that. I really do love those characters, the Roadrunner and Coyote, specifically Coyote, and I got to, at least I wish I did more. I only got to do 2 shorts with Coyote and Roadrunner, but I wish I was able to do more. But it was I loved, and I got to do in a way, I got to do the Ralph and Sam Sheepdog, and Ralph Wolf is sort of like a semi Coyote.
Yeah.
So I got to do it. Technically, I guess I got to do a little bit more in the vein of Coyote with Ralph Wolf. But the big one for me was Beaky. I always loved Beaky.
And you got to
Beaky
voice
Buzzard
Beaky.
yeah, I mean, Beaky Buzzard was always my favorite Looney Tunes character.
Oh, really?
And I love them. So the fact that I got to not only draw him, but then eventually get to do his voice for a little while.
Yeah, you got to step into Kent Rogers' shoes for a minute.
Yeah, and I actually when I pitched and I was thinking about even just before, I didn't even know I was going to be the voice yet. Because I asked Pete, because Pete was telling me early on, when we're doing the show, we're going to go back, and we had Jim Soper did these like these mock-up title cards, and one of them was of like the Gremlin, the Bugs and the Gremlin
Yeah.
with the car, and it was like, oh, you really going back? I was like, yeah, we're going full Clampett. We're going to go back to Clampett. And I said, are you going to do Beaky? And he goes, oh yeah, of course we're going to do Beaky. And I'm like, oh, I love Beaky. If we ever do a Beaky, I'd love to board a Beaky if you trust me enough. Because at the time I was just starting on my first short when I got onto the show. And I said, if there's an opportunity to do a Beaky, I'd love to be able to draw Beaky. And he goes, absolutely, dude. Totally.
Amazing.
And I got to do, I think the Beaky Buzzard School was my 3rd cartoon.
Okay.
And he's like, we're doing Beaky.
Nice.
And I said, cool. And I got to write and channel, look at the old, Bugs Bunny Gets the Boyd and the Bashful Buzzard, and look at those old shorts and kind of channel that energy there. And the funny thing is, like, everybody, when we were boarding, and all the boarders had to pitch too. When we were done, we'd go into the room. We'd go into this conference room, and we'd have our boards up on the computer screen on this big TV, and we'd pitch the cartoons live to the crew to gauge reactions and see if the cartoons worked and everything. And so, like, everybody boards, or everybody, of course, boards differently. Everyone has a very unique voice when they board and when they draw and what have you. But everybody pitches differently, and I'm always overcompensating for everything. So, like, when I'm pitching, I'm always doing the voice. I'm always doing, sound effects with my mouth. Again, going back to like Matt Craig when I was on New Looney Tunes and Wabbit, just channeling that energy and keeping the characters, if the fact that what makes Bugs' dialogue funny is because he has that New York accent. He's Brooklyn Bronx Bugs kind of thing. So like, I knew there's certain words he would say and things he would do, and the delivery is what helps sell the joke. Right. So, and I was totally overcompensating, but with Beaky, I actually went back and looked at not only just the cartoon, the Kent Rogers, voice, not even just a voice match, but just like the fact that it came from Edgar Bergen and Mortimer Snerd, which is what the character was based off. It was the puppet Mortimer Snerd. And if anybody, I don't know, most people probably have no idea who Mortimer Snerd or Edgar Bergen or Charlie McCarthy are. But if anybody who likes cartoons has ever seen Fun and Fancy Free, the Disney movie with Mickey and the Beanstalk, there's that weird scene where Jiminy Cricket goes over to Luana Patton, this little girl, she was a child actress's house, and he's throwing her like a birthday party, and it's like this guy with these two puppets, these ventriloquist dummies, and it's like, what the hell is going on? This is weird. As a kid, I was even like, what is this? But I knew that, like, there's something about how he delivered Mortimer Snerd's lines, because he says things like, "Oh, no, if you're gonna kill the cow, I don't want to hear the rest of the story." And he would get like, just like, he's an old hick, this is like an old kind of country bumpkin. Right. So I'd look at I tried to find as much footage of Edgar Bergen performing Mortimer Snerd as possible, and just to kind of get the cadences right and figure out like what are words that Beaky, what would he say and what would he not say? He wouldn't use multi-syllabic words. He's very simple. Yeah. And then when I went in and pitched the cartoon, I did all the voice. I did Bugs talking to Beaky and back and forths, and it got laughs. Because I'm always doing like, what's going, what are you doing, Doc? Oh, I'm looking for a rabbit. Oh, a rabbit. What are you going to do with that rabbit? Oh, I can't tell you. No. Oh, no. And I would just do it. And there's actually footage of me pitching.
Oh, it's great.
That we showed at Annecy years ago. But I would, and it sold it, like, I guess people really like, Pete and Alex really liked the delivery. And it's like, you sound like Beaky. You sound dumb and stupid, and it was just perfect for Beaky. Do you want to play Beaky?
What a compliment.
And I was like, I know it's a wonderful compliment when working cartoons. But I said, well, I want to be earnest with it. And I don't want to don't just give me the role. I want to audition. So I actually auditioned. They had a set of lines, and I said them, and they auditioned a bunch of people, and Pete and Alex were like, well, you like yours. We really like how you figured out that the laugh isn't it's not an impediment. He's actually giddy. It's not him going, nope. It's not a like a tick. It's not like a stutter or like Porky stutter or anything. It's just he's tickled, like almost like oh, and he's just like, it's not just like it's not a repetitive or a clinical thing.
Yeah, it's very nuanced. And so you definitely captured it for sure.
He's just bashful, like everything tickles him. So like that's part of it, is that he getting down to his character, even though he is in many ways a very one-dimensional character. That's why they really didn't use him past the 40s. But it was fun to you don't have a lot of dumb, bashful characters anymore in cartoons. So it's fun to kind of bring him kind of back. And thankfully I had both Bob Bergen and Eric Bowser were super supportive.
That's great.
Bob gave me some great direction. I took his voice over class, and he's a good friend. And I was for the first Beaky cartoon, I was in the booth with Bowser, and we got him doing Bugs against me doing Beaky. It was my first time really in a professional voiceover booth.
Wow.
And he gave me some tips, and he did like, you know how far you need to be from the microphone? And I said, what? And he went like, he did like a cool, like the rad, like you can't really see because there's no video, but you stick your hand out and put your pinky and your thumb out, and you kind of just go, yeah, and like rock
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Yeah, rock
And it's
on.
like, and he said, that's the length. If you put your thumb to your nose and you stick your pinky out, that's how far you should be from the mic.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, oh, if you're going to pop your peas, do the pencil trick. And I said, what's the pencil trick? It's like, well, if you're going to pop your peas, if you do it in the mic, you're going to get feedback. But if you put your pencil right between your lips, and if you make a puh noise, the force of air gets diverted away from the mic to either side.
Wow.
So like, because Beaky smacks his lips and goes, oh, 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 and like does a lot of little, over accentuates certain
Syllables,
consonants and stuff and syllables.
Yeah.
So like, oh, that helps a lot. And he also he just helped keep me at ease. Like, don't worry, we're having fun here. Just treat it like play. And which was really the whole show in many ways, both from boarding and voicing, is that we just treated it like play. Like they put us in a sandbox with a bunch of Looney Tunes figures and we got to play. That's what it really felt like for the whole run of the series.
That's what it feels like when you watch it too. It just feels like these guys are having fun with this, and the talent behind the mic, the talent behind the drawings, the pencils, like everybody is just oozing with talent, oozing with excitement for getting these characters back out there in this retro style. And that's just something I really appreciated. And bringing it back into, the topic of hex appeal, Alex Kerwan, one of the main producers on this show, was really adamant about bringing Witch Hazel back. Did you work alongside Alex to prepare for this undertaking of this classic character?
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it was sort of his baby in a way. Like he knew that this was something that he really wanted to do. He wanted to do a Witch Hazel cartoon, and it was his idea to do a cartoon specifically in the style, in the vein of Ronald Searle. And for those that don't know, Ronald Searle was a British illustrator, very famous. He was famous for doing a series of illustrations of these rambunctious, nasty little girls called the St. Trinian's girls. But he did a lot of great, illustrations. He lived to be in his 90s, and he was illustrating since the 1940s.
Wow.
In fact, he illustrated while he was in a POW camp during World War II. He was a really interesting British illustrator. And if you look at Chuck Jones's stuff going into the 50s, he started getting really inspired by people like Picasso and Ronald Searle. So if you look at his designs for a lot of his human characters come like late 50s. If you look at the cartoon Deduce You Say,
yes,
the one where Daffy is Dorlock Holmes with Porky. A lot of the human characters are like his interpretations of, like, if you look at a Ronald Searle illustration and put it side by side with some of the characters in Deduce You Say or in some of his later cartoons, sort of how he drew lips and how he drew eyes, and they were small and kind of squinty and slanted, and he would draw these very unique head shapes and almost like not even blocky, but just sort of weirdly shaped heads and stuff. But it was like he was inspired by Ronald Searle. So it was fun to be like, well, Witch Hazel's design is sort of influenced indirectly by Ronald Searle. So wouldn't it be fun to kind of go back to the source, to what Chuck Jones was inspired by, and let's do something in the vein of Ronald Searle. And that was all Alex's, really his doing. It was really his, he spearheaded that whole thing. And he asked me, when we did the board, he's like, I want to do it in this style. It's going to have kind of a weird, some things are going to be inside of a line and some things are going to be outside. Like her head is not going to have an outline. It's just going to be like a big green shape, and the lines are going to break, and it's going to be very graphic. And I said, that's really cool. How the hell are we going to pull that off? And when he told me even initially, he's like, you don't have to draw it in the Searle style. You could draw it in your own, and then we'll just have our designers, and our designers were amazing. We had Stephen DeStefano did the final character designs on that short, and he did a great job. And, but I said, you know what, it's going to help sell it if I try to at least, I like the challenge. And with any board, the thing I look for more is the challenge of each episode or each project I go on to. What am I going to learn? What's something, a new muscle that I'm going to work out here? And for that, I was like, if it's going to be in the Ronald Searle style, let me try and capture that look, or at least, sell the idea. So when other people see maybe the animatic, they could be like, oh, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
And Alex gave me a lot of reference. He gave me some really great reference of Ronald Searle, some great PDFs and copies of books. And I scanned through them over a weekend before I started. And he did these wonderful drawings of Witch Hazel. I think he's posted them on his Instagram.
I think so.
But he did that. He literally showed them to me. He's like, yeah, I just did these last night. And I'm like, you bastard, you're so good. And Alex is an amazing. His drawings were coveted. We would be in the boardroom at launches for cartoons, and he would do these drawings either on Post-its or on paper with marker. And we collect. I have like one or two of them here in my place. But there were people. We would do a drawing and people would snag them because his drawings were like effortlessly brilliant. He's so amazing.
But don't cut yourself too short. I feel like you also nailed that Ronald Searle approach to Witch Hazel, and the way that you do the line work for her hair, the hat, like the whole thing, and the way that her face ends up in that grotesque, like, skin peeling off, and it doesn't have form. I think you nailed that. So
yeah, well, thank you. And of course, we had, like I mentioned before, knowing that Candy was going to do the voice, that helped. I put in a lot of. I looked at, of course, the old cartoons to try to understand the character's movements, how she would move, and how she would, gesticulate and things like that. But also just not to accidentally copy anything that was already done. Try to go into new territory with her. I even looked at the other Witch Hazel cartoon, the Donald one, the Trick or Treat.
Oh, right.
And there's a lot of little, the Disney one, the one that Chuck Jones is like, I want a witch. He's like, I want one. This witch is cool. And then he came up with his own.
He kept the name.
June Foray. He kept the name. It's Witch Hazel. It's a great pun because most people don't have Witch Hazel in their medicine cabinets anymore, but it was a thing that people had and people knew the reference back then. Yes. But anywho, the cat I originally named the cat Beelzebub in the short because the cat didn't have a name, but Witch Hazel's broom in that Disney short it was Beelzebub.
Oh, okay.
And at one point she looks in a cauldron and goes, repulsive. And that's right out of Trick or Treat.
I love that. So the cat, real quick, bringing up that character, because it had its moment when it gets stuck in the bottle and then the bottle breaks and then its hair just like springs out. How hard was that to draw?
The funny thing is the easiest character to draw on the whole series, I love drawing Coyote and Beaky and the other characters, but that spider, the little spider, because I would just draw black. I had my my pen, in Storyboard Pro, that was the program we board our shorts in. I would just draw a big black blob and then erase where the eyes would be. And then I just add these spindly legs. And the cat, thankfully, there was one really great drawing of that cat from the original cartoon. I just lifted that verbatim because it's such a brilliant design. And it's just a big black shape.
With skinny legs and tail.
With skinny little legs and a flared out tail and these bright green, yellowy eyes. And it was just, literally, you would just draw a big black shape and then just almost with an eraser just carve out what that wasn't going to be there. Because how I kind of draw in a weird sculptural way where I just draw a big mass of like the shape of what the character is, and then I go in with an eraser and carve out a lot of the time. But for the Witch Hazel one specifically, because it had that Ronald Searle sort of line, and I asked Alex, how do you draw? Because he figured out how to draw in that style because he was actually using a dip pen, which is what Ronald Searle did with his illustrations. He used an old fountain dip pen.
Wow.
And I had to replicate it in a program with vector brushes,
Yeah.
And he gave me some hokey, every line is a journey. And I'm like, okay. So I brought that back and I literally, because ever since I worked myself really hard on the first season of Wabbit, and I had borderline heart failure and I have a slightly shaky hand.
Oh no.
My hands, I can't like do like nice, like pinch, like my dad tried to teach me pinstriping when I was a teenager, and I hated that, but like I
Sure.
couldn't do that now. But it helped a little bit with that Ronald Searle style because my hands are a little shaky, and also the program, because it's vector based tools, it's like it almost wants to make it perfect. So you get those little the thick and thin kind of janky like ink line that's almost a little shaky. It
Right.
helped a
Yeah.
lot. So like a lot of that um, translated really well, and I got to go over and think graphically, like in terms of the silhouette. So like Witch Hazel's body is just a big, almost like a big, you know, bold geometric shape, and then like that little spider, I would just draw a ball and then just add the legs,
I love
and
that.
it was so fun to kind of think graphically. And the background stuff, the stuff that Aaron Spurgeon and his team came up with, like I didn't do a lot of like planning as far as the layouts goes. I knew that like, oh, this is her call, this is where her cauldron is, and there's this and that and basic ideas for layouts. But their team went absolutely, they had a blast coming up with all these great colors and figuring out spotlights of color where you just see a big shape just take up the whole. It was a very like in terms of like all the cartoons are unique and beautiful, but like they really got to go full, you know, 50s UPA graphic, just free form shapes and silhouetted backgrounds and big blocks of color. And it was really a real tour de force for the art team on that short.
And in that respect, it really stands out from the rest of the catalog. I gotta say, like
Yeah,
it's so beautiful to look at, and
I'm so proud of the final product and all
it's
the
so
work that went
great.
into it, especially also the anime. And I'm gonna for all the shorts, but we had three animation studios: Tonic DNA, Yowza, and Snipple. And Yowza did the animation on that Hex Appeal short, and they knocked it out of the park. They did such a beautiful job on that cartoon because I
Really
was like,
did.
how that? Because I saw like Steven DeStefano's designs and seeing my boards cut together with the voice and everything with Candy's voice, and still in my mind thinking, how the hell are they going to pull this off? And I saw the final product, and I was just like, wow, that looks so spot on. They figured out a way to cheat, like certain things, like cheating, because Witch Hazel's a very graphic character, so cheating like her mouth and her and getting those gnarly hands in there, and her hair, the fact that her hair, and the old cartoon was like it too, that her hair and her hat, there's no break in them, so it's just one big black shape of her hair bleeds right into into the hat, the silhouette.
Yeah.
And they did such a fantastic job taking my chicken scratch boards and interpreting them and making them actually really really fantastic. They did a bang up job on that.
Well, shout out to
So
Yowza and all the work going on over there. I mean, yeah, this short is immaculate to look at. And while I still have you, I want to do a quick uh, crash, like fast round of questions from
sure.
the Twitter handles and Twitter users that follow the podcast. Luke Perkins wanted to know when boarding or writing some of these shorts, what specific classic Looney Tunes or Merry Melodies cartoons do you look for inspiration? And I'm guessing that's based around like what character you're looking at. You'll go back to their originals. But are there any shorts that you just love revisiting for inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, obviously on the Looney Tune shorts, the benchmark, we aimed for Clampett. Jones has been done, forever.
Yeah.
So it was fun to kind of go into the Clampett thing, Clampett kind of style. But there's one really underrated director that I love, and I love all of his cartoons. They're so weird because Art Davis kind of
Mhm.
inherited Clampett's kind of department.
Right.
So there was cartoons that Clampett started and his team started, and then he left, and then Art Davis and his team took over for a few years, and then finally he went back into animating, and then Rob McKimson eventually took over his unit later. But there's a wonderful period in the 40s where Art Davis is directing these really outlandishly just unique compared to all of his content. Like Fritz Freeling has a very distinct way of timing and writing and drawing. His cartoons look and feel different than Jones, that feels different than Clampett, that feels different than McKimson. But no one ever really talks about those Art Davis cartoons. And I love that there's it's sort of like a weird bridge between the early kind of wacky Clampett stuff, but it's grounding it a little bit more. But the cartoons are still a little bit weirdly surreal and cerebral, and some of the gags are really like outlandish, and like there's one I tried getting these characters into the show. There's one cartoon called Do Rey-Me-ow, which
Mhm.
is an Art Davis with Heathcliff and Louie.
Read to me what's on this pretty paper, Louie. Read to me what's on this pretty paper.
Okay, let's have it. Last will and testament. I, being of sound mind and I leave $1 million to my pet cat Heathcliff. In the event of his disappearance, the money goes to my pet bird Louie. Uh-huh.
This dumb cat and this parrot that wants him dead to collect the insurance money. And I love that cartoon. It's a weird one because it's just a dumb, dopey cat and this angry parrot. Just a weird pairing, these one-off characters. And then there's other ones like the Stupor Salesman, which is a Daffy, a standalone Daffy with a I guess a thug or a burglar in a house. He's trying to sell him something door to door.
The cops will never find me here. Cops!
Thanks for the lift, chum. Gosh, those state police are sure swell guys. That sure would have been a long walk with my flat feet. My dogs are killing me.
Bye Bye Bluebeard. Like he did so many of these very surreal. There's one with Porky and a squirrel. I think it's called Porky Chops, where Porky's trying to chop down a tree, and there's this like slang talking squirrel with this giant bushy tail.
This ought to do it. Oh, doggone it. So you're the one behind all this.
It's like he came up with so many of these one-off characters that just didn't go anywhere. And I guess technically, if there's any characters that really kind of grew out of his department, maybe the Goofy Gophers, because I think he took over Clampett's unit as he was writing the Goofy Gopher.
He did,
the first
yeah.
Goofy Gopher short.
Hey, look, who am I making like? What's up, Doc? Oh, my, that was clever. Oh, my, very clever, very. This looks good. Cucumbers, say, and turnips. Well, potatoes. I love potatoes. Oh, I'm taking some of these, too.
Delicious, isn't it?
But have you tried the pumpkin today?
Pumpkin? Why, no.
Well, here, have some.
So then you got to see a little bit of that with that like thespian. There was a thespian dog, which I think was a later McKimson one.
Mm-hmm.
But he did the one with this yellow dog that like he's such a weird design, and a lot of those characters that Art Davis's cartoons had were just surreal, like weird. They don't fit. They oddly don't fit in the realm of Looney Tunes. They almost feel like they could have existed at like Walter Lantz studio or Columbia or one of the other contemporary studios at the time. It doesn't feel right, but it stands out like a sore thumb amongst the others, and they're so unique and funny.
It does, but at the same time, it adds texture to it. Like
Right.
if you get tired of seeing Bugs Bunny, which it happens if you watch enough of it over and over and over again, and then you have the Goofy Gophers, Macintosh show up. It's a breath of fresh air to see these lesser Art Davis characters fill the screen, and that's what I love about it. It's a texture thing,
and also proto versions of characters. Like there's like a proto Pepper Le Pew.
Oh, right.
He did a few Sylvesters where Sylvester is like a dumb lummoxy cat, where he's not quite like Frisk Freeling was already doing Sylvester cartoons at that time, but you get like weird like how each director would interpret characters like Daffy or Bugs or any of the others, but then you see how Art Davis would treat Sylvester as just sort of like this dumb cat. I don't know. I just find it, and even how they drew him, he looks really like brain dead in those cartoons, and I love those. And also like you have these great animators like Bill Melendez and Emery Hawkins, who were these fantastic animators.
Yeah,
animating. They were Bill Melendez in particular working under Clampett doing some of the crazier stuff in the Clampett cartoons, and then coming in on these Art Davis cartoons and really knocking it out of the park.
Truly,
Um,
truly
I
inspiring work.
always would look at those for inspiration, especially for drawing Daffy.
Yeah.
Because he always Emery Hawkins would always draw Daffy with these 1,000-mile stare eyes, and I always tried to. It never quite worked out, but I'd always try to sneak a couple, like where Daffy's eyes just wouldn't focus, and they would just look off like they put 1,000-yard stare, and he wouldn't focus on anything. But yeah, those are great.
So last question from Insane Cartoonist. Which character from the Looniverse, as it's called, would you say is your favorite to draw?
Of like the main staple of Looney Tunes characters, mine, I'd probably go with Coyote.
Okay.
There's something about Coyote. He's like silly putty. Like all that matters was that his head, his cranium.
Yeah.
His cranium is a solid shape. It's a hard skull, but everything else, his cheeks, his muzzle, his snout, his ears, are just they were it's like yeah, like silly putty. You could draw them what you think it looks wrong, but it somehow looks right with him. Bugs is so hard to draw right, and Tweety is so hard to draw right, and Porky is so hard to draw right because they're so distinct and cute, and you can't really break them as characters. But Coyote, you just get, and I tried so hard. I screen grabbed like 1,500 screen grabs from those old Chuck Jones cartoons just to not only study them but also just not copy any of them. I didn't want to lift any specific expressions from any of those old cartoons when I would draw like takes on Coyote.
That's amazing.
It would be great for you to talk at some point. I don't know. Have you ever spoke to Jim Soper?
I haven't yet. Just
Jim,
on social media.
Yeah, Jim is fantastic because when he was designing the Looney Tunes characters, he would put little nods to their first appearance or their earlier appearance in his designs. That's why Bugs has the yellow gloves.
Right.
That's why Sylvester has like kind of almost like a snake-like body, how his neck connects into his head with the yellow eyes, and why Elmer has the little button nose and things like that. And with Coyote, he's a character that didn't exist. Clampett never drew Coyote. Coyote was a late 40s character. Same with characters like Marvin and some of the others. So it's like, what would happen if Coyote and Roadrunner were designed in, say, 1940 under the Clampett unit? So it's like, not only is it's harkening back to Coyote's first appearance in Fast and Furious, but also there's a slight Clampetiness to his design in terms of how it's, certain shapes and there's not a lot of angular stuff.
Yeah.
But then also the thing that I find really funny is that if you look at Chuck Jones's earliest designs for Coyote and Roadrunner, like he did his proto designs,
right?
Because Chuck Jones embodied Mark Twain, and there's a great description that he wrote. He did a book called Roughing It, and there's a great description of the Coyote that he wrote that said that it's just one of the things is that the Coyote is a living, breathing allegory of want, and and the fact that he's a pathetic creature. And there's something about how Jim drew Coyote in the show that makes him look he looks like the Jones. He still embodies the Jones style in a way of who Coyote is and his proportions of things, but there's that Clampetiness to it, but they're still hearkening back to this sort of pathetic description of what a coyote is by Mark Twain. So it's a combination of all this stuff, and then knowing that you can't really break Coyote. You could beat him up in so many different ways, and it was fun just figuring out how to draw expressions on him and to make him look really gnarly and really feral sometimes, but then also really kind of like a pantomime. I love pantomime characters, and the fact that he only would speak through his body language. I loved drawing poses of him, and I did one cartoon that I really was proud of, the Portal Combat.
Oh, I love.
And I got to draw. So I got to go to town drawing Coyote on that, and I really do love Coyote. I mean, I will say I will get, my eyes will cross if I watch more than like 3 or 4 Coyotes back to back. But I never get tired of looking through those cartoons frame by frame and studying the animation and just the drawings and how you draw that character. And I miss drawing him. It's one of the characters I wish I got to draw more. while I was on the show. But I'm glad at least I got to touch that character for a little while and play around in that
awesome.
particular sandbox.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, especially with how much it means to you and your grandfather, and that connection, I think is really special as well.
One last little anecdotal story before I go. Right before COVID, because we had to do we near the end of the show, they sent us home for COVID, and I only got to work on 2 more shorts. It was the one with Sylvester and Porky at the inn, that was in the Halloween one, and then another one which hasn't aired yet. Those are my last 2. But right before that, we didn't know that we were going to be sent home. We wanted to. Jim did this beautiful drawing of Bugs as Big Chungus, and I wanted to. I was literally like. I asked Jim for a high-res copy of that image so I can have it made into a large cutout so I could just put it in Pete's office, and then it would just be there. So everywhere he would go, he would see Big Chungus. And then COVID came, and we didn't end up getting to do that. And the funny thing was about that one last little, I keep saying I tend to ramble. I apologize. But we did that cartoon where Bugs gets fat. Our friend David Scher boarded that one. It was a Kenny Pittenger directed it.
Yeah.
And David
Robust Bunny.
Yeah, Robust Bunny, exactly. And we did that cartoon of Bugs getting fat. And then the week that David Scher pitched it, Big Chungus became a meme. And we were like, people are just going to think we made a Big Chungus cartoon. But it was like the timing was so surreal that like somehow Fat Bugs from that old Fat Bugs image became like a meme.
Yeah.
Right as we're making a cartoon where Bugs gets fat.
That's amazing.
And we were like, and the thing is, you wish that you could just tell everybody, no, that's not how it is. Or like the thing about like, oh, Elmer not having the guns. That's not how it, there's a lot more to it than, it meets the eye. And it's nice to be able to like tell stories about the behind the scenes and like clue people in on how these things are made a little bit and give them a clue as to how these shows are made. So a lot of rumor and misinformation doesn't continue to spread around.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks again for allowing me to wax nostalgia because I missed that show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being on. Congratulations on everything going on with the Annie nomination and your animation work. I can't wait to see what else you work on next. Can you tell the people where to find you and what to look forward to?
Yeah. So I'm mostly on. You can find me on Instagram. I think it's just Michael J. Ruocco on Instagram. RUOCCO on Instagram. I'm on Twitter a lot, probably more than I should be, but it's Twitter at a guy who draws. That's my handle on there. That. And I do a lot of warm-ups. I do a lot of doodles in Storyboard Pro. I actually, ever since working on Looney Tunes and stuff, I actually really do like doodling in the program. So a lot of my doodles are using the same program I made the shorts in. And it's fun to draw on that software. There's a couple things coming up I can't really talk about yet. I'm in between gigs right now. I'm looking right now. It seems like everywhere it's a weird time in animation right now. And so we're all just sort of holding our breath, seeing what's going to happen. But I have a couple things on the docket on the side, but also it's going to be more Looney Tunes shorts coming. I don't know when they're coming out, but there's still a bunch that we all worked hard on and eventually will get released, and we're all really proud of them. And I also was on the Porky and Daffy movie for a bit, and
can't wait.
We had such a blast on that, and hope that keeps going through and sees the light of day. And
same.
So that's but either way, that's where you can find me on Twitter, mostly Twitter and Instagram.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And you can follow the podcast over at This Means Pod on Facebook and on Instagram, or OFC This Means Pod on Twitter. You can also follow the TikTok at This Means Podcast, where I started talking a little bit about the anticipation everyone has and making people more aware of the Coyote versus Acme movie produced by James Gunn. So you can check out that over there. And I'll be covering everything Looniverse here at the podcast. So keep up to date. And as always, that's not all, folks. Have a good one.
So tell me, Doug, when you find this, rabbit, what are you gonna do with it?
No, I can't say it. Oh, no.
Aw, come on. Tell me.
No, it's too gruesome. No.
I'm genuinely curious. Please?
Well, I shouldn't tell you, but if I could, I'd say... I'm gonna catch him and maul him and beat him and skin him and grind him up and make him into rabbit meatballs. But I'm not gonna tell you. Oh, no. Oh, no.